Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Counsel with the Consuls. Their Majesties today welcome the Kingdom Seneschal and Kingdom Earl Marshal to discuss a much questioned topic by the populace. Your Majesties.
Good afternoon. Thank you to both Mistress Medhbh and to Vissevald for joining us, and for everyone who is watching at home. This is absolutely a topic that has been on our minds, that we have been actively discussing, and we wanted to kind of broaden the scope of that discussion a little bit looking forward, and really take an opportunity to, having reread Kingdom Law and what the limitations are moving forward, what our timetables could be, and what we may be able to accomplish.
Yeah, this is basically the time for us to kind of set the stage and set some framework up about the discussions that we will coming up in February, just because of holidays and so forth, to go regional with questions about Crown Tournament and how we can hold a crown from the different sections of the populace. So let's start with some questions.
So the big question that is coming up, and one of the more interesting ones that came through on the list is, how do we grow cabbages bigger for next year?
Ooh,
That's a really good question.
my understanding is we want a colder climate for larger cabbages. So cross your fingers for very snowy winter. We're all going to be at home anyway.
One of the other recommendations for that is to move to Alaska, where they kind of have big cabbages to begin with.
Oh, so I was going to stay in this kingdom.
But anyway, thank you for that question. That's a really good one to start us off with, to try to levity the situations.
And of course, several came in to ask, what are the plans for Crown Tournament? How are we starting? What does it look like? What are the plans to make sure that we are able to involve Tirmara?
Ooh, that was more than one question. Let's start with, why don't we start with the biggest one, which is what can Crown be? And as far as I know, we're still working within the legal framework of the society for what Crown Tournament can be. Crown Tournament must be contested within the heavy armored combat list. It must be a double elimination tournament. And beyond that, do we have requirements that we have to meet that we can't?
Depending on if you're going by society bylaws or by the East Kingdom laws.
Okay.
Maeve can probably tune us in a little bit more about what is actually required for a Crown Tournament for membership issues.
Mistress Medhbh, you're muted currently.
No,
Still muted.
perhaps microphone malfunction.
There you
Now?
go. You're good.
Sorry. According to Corpora, Your Majesty, or according to EK law?
Why don't we start with EK law first, because that's mostly what people kind of already know.
Yes. So one must be a paid member of the society. One has to have access to the newsletter at your place of residence. And I will make a note here that with the newsletters going electronic, they will be updating Corpora and making that a little bit clear that your access can be electronic access as opposed to mail subscription access. But you must be fighting for a prospective consort. You can't fight solo. You can only be in the list once. You cannot fight for two separate potential consorts, although of course a fighter consort pair can each fight for the other, as Your Majesties well know.
Yeah.
And they must fill out a letter of intent and so on, and EK law describes what's required there. But in short, the letter of intent affirms that both the consort and the combatant are able to fulfill the requirements of the reign. And so Corpora actually leaves most of requirements for Crown Tournament to the variations of kingdom law, aside from that it must be chivalric, which they specify rattan combat. Thank you.
So working within that box, which I think we were all pretty familiar with, the second question becomes, how do we include Canada? And my actual question, I'm going to tweak that one a little bit, because I think the border issue with us and Tiaramara is significant. But what if we can only have small events? Does Crown Tournament need to be fought as a single list on a single day?
So if I can speak to that, one of the plans is that if we can only have small events, that we have basically a bear pit crown tournament, except each of the bear pits are in different parts of the kingdom. And so on one day, or perhaps over a couple of days, you would have some number of bear pits scattered, hopefully cleverly, across the kingdom to determine the final 8 or the final 16 or whatever number it is we think is the right number. My guess is 8, but that's just a guess. And then on a later weekend, the people who come out of those regional tournaments would fight in a small quarterfinals onwards crown tournament. Crown semifinals and finals.
So let me just ask a logistical question there. What would our, obviously we can't, if we're doing simultaneous across the kingdom, we can't cover all of those with physical presence. You can't be at all of them. What is our obligation for monitoring those regional bear pits?
So the kingdom law is that I have to be at a crown tournament if I can be, and if I can't be, I can have a representative there. If we all had them on the same day, Cedric would go to one, I would go to another one. We'd get some senior marshals to go to whichever ones that we can't cover, and then I would stay linked to all of them electronically. If we had them on different days, I would probably go to all of them. That would be my preference. As far as is reasonable. If I can't get into Canada, I can't get into Canada. Though that's tricky too, because one of the exceptions for crossing the border is if you're crossing for an educational organization or for work, and we could argue that I was, but I would prefer that if we have a senior person there to just do that.
Yeah, and then, well, and the tricky thing there is if we can't get you into Canada, how do we get the victor of that bear pit, I'm assuming, back across to this side of the border?
So basically what you're saying is, as I'm trying to envision this, is we basically have like boxing or wrestling scrimmages kind of a thing amongst the groups where basically creating the double limb tourney from those winners of those local tournaments.
That's correct. Just as if it were a bear pit crown,
right?
Where you had different pods.
Right. So the real issue that we have is trying to create a reasonable timeline, because we don't know when this pandemic is going to be over with. We don't know what rules are going to change amongst our states and amongst Canada about where this thing's going to go. So having a strict timeline on when there's going to be a succession or anything like that is kind of hard to envision right now. So one of my crazy ideas, and I will I will going to keep that a secret until we actually have our town hall meetings, is to figure out some way to include Canada within the structure. Since the border is closed and we have really no timeline of when that border is going to open.
Your Majesties, if I may, Mistress Medhbh had a comment.
Yep, most certainly.
Thank you. Corporal leaves to Kingdom how to design their own crown tournaments. So something like this regional bear pit format is completely fine, so that the populace knows. The EK law requires that the crown attend their crown tournament. So depending on what we come up with, for example, if it were possible that each bear pit preliminary had Wi-Fi available and it were streaming in some fashion, but it might be possible that we might need a variance from Society Seneschal to be creative about how the royal presence were at the regional things, right? But having the regional is fine.
Right. It's interesting to me because we're thinking of this, and just as we're having the conversation, right? We're thinking of this all as a crown tournament, but I'm wondering if, in terms of how we talk about it versus how we meet the letter of the law, to say that there are regional crown tournaments through which, or there are regional tournaments through which we will select the combatants for crown tournament, right? Like,
Yes.
Are the regionals de facto an extension of crown tournament, or is that final tournament still what would be defined as crown, and we're simply using them as a combative way to narrow the field?
I
Right.
agree with that interpretation, Your Majesty.
Right. The way I see it is that all these little tournaments funnel up to what will be a crown tournament. Not necessarily each one of those small little tournaments we're making basically a condition to enter crown, right? So you fought in your local tournament, you go to the regional tournament, and then you go into the crown tournament. You know, that kind of.
So if I could, one of the things that you were talking about before was timeline. And I like the idea of discussing timeline. And I don't want to put a pin on the calendar, but what I do want to say is we're talking, it's end of November right now. The plan for February is to have a broader discussion with the entire kingdom, region by region, town hall style.
At town halls, that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, but that pushes out the start of this at a minimum past that to probably March, probably April at a minimum, because logistically organizing, but also right now, February per society, February is the soonest we'd be able to have events. I suspect that depending on how the winter goes, that event ban could be longer. And if that event ban gets longer, we've lived it. I don't want to see things get pushed down a calendar. I think if we decide on dates, I'd like it to be in a format or a time that we could stick to it and not have to move. And I think at the end of the day, that decision, I think it's as much input as possible, but that decision is going to be.
That's with us because we're the ones that set crown tournament to begin with, and with the Earl Marshal and the Seneschal on board with that. So it's probably going to be the four of us who are going to basically decide when these things can happen. Do you disagree with that comment that we just made? That it's going to be a decision of the four of us. All right.
I think it's basically correct. I will note, if I remember correctly, that you folks are allowed to end your reign early, and then we have to figure out what the hell to do about regents. But hopefully you will not do that.
That's a regents. That's a really good term. That is a really good term. And if I could have Maeve please define what a regent would be.
I am happy to do that, Your Majesty. I happen to have right here my notes. So East Kingdom law defines in the part of law for succession, if a consort or a combatant is unable to serve, the other one continues as regent. And so the regent is a crowned one of the pair who continues for the rest of the reign. If both combatant and consort are unable to serve. The Kingdom Seneschal holds the crown for the heirs. There's no convenient handy term for that. I think we shorthand it as regent, but technically in law, the regent is a solo crown.
Basically, I would call that the crown would go into a receivership within the seneschal. So when
Yes.
the crown tourney can be held, they can then invest the next consort, sovereign consorts at that time with, I believe it is with someone who has been previous royalty can then do that.
So in this receivership situation, it takes courts off the board, it takes awards off the board, because you don't have monarchs to open court, to run court. Does it, and this is my question, does it affect any of the rest of the running of the king? Does the rest of the kingdom continue to function, or how far down the shutdown would that take us?
You are correct that there can be no awards given, that the Kingdom Seneschal holding on to the crown until there are heirs may not give awards, may not hold curia, and may not sign treaties. So top-level royal activity cannot happen if the seneschal is holding the crown for the heirs. But they can have non-royal progress events, according to, if we're allowed to by society have events. But there may be practices, there may be various sorts of ANS activities, and all of those sorts of local activities may continue.
So I'm just following this through. So if we take kingdom level courts off the table, the landed baronage as representative of the crown would still function as normal?
That would be my interpretation, because EK law doesn't say anything, frankly, about what the seneschal holding the crown may or may not translate into the baronial level.
Okay. Yeah, we're slightly uncharted here.
And so that is it. If the seneschal holds the crown for any reason other than sudden military absence or something like that, right? If it's an urgent situation in which the crown's been vacated unexpectedly, the seneschal must hold crown tournament at the earliest possible date, is what EK law says. So that might be dependent on society's ban on in-person events, for example. But at the earliest possible date, the seneschal must hold crown tournament. And law details what happens if the seneschal has to run crown tournament. I won't get into that now, but if you're interested, it is section 2, capital D as in David, 3 and following describes how to hold crown tournament in those particular circumstances.
Under succession.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we used a lot of words like as soon as possible with very different meanings back then.
Your Majesty,
yeah.
Can we go back to your plan for the town hall meetings? What kinds of things are you looking to gain from the opinion from the populace in regards to those? Who's going to be invited to those sorts of meetings? And what is your goal?
So I think to answer that in 2 parts. One, I imagine right now we're still working out some of the logistics on the technical side. I imagine there being a similar to a curia where there would be a small number of people with an active voice, but in a way that was broadly available so that people could see the live discussion. So if you thought of if we ran it region by region, if you looked at your local seneschals, your landed baronage, people that would have a voice at a curia would be within a Zoom meeting like we are right now and able to feed us questions and concerns, but that would then be live streamed so that everyone could see it, because realistically it's difficult to get everyone's voice heard in a lecture hall style electronic meeting.
Basically, just to make it reasonable, doing it a curious style where your seneschal is your voice. So basically, get all your questions together, what you want, give them to your seneschalate and your landed baronages, and then they can ask the questions to us, definitely in a live stream format. So it's basically everything is transparent. Has the bot given us any guidance to that? I saw we have some prompters here looking at the questions too. No, the bot hasn't really given us that much guidance on how to do crown tournaments or anything like that. So
They're right. At the society level, there's been no modifications to what is required for crown. And the guidance we have, because Tiramara and the border was a concern, the guidance we had was to conduct basically a conversation with the populace. The town hall was what we settled on, but to have a conversation with the populace so that whatever decision we end up with is one that is informed, has been discussed, and still meets the tradition and the feeling of it being an East Kingdom crown.
unless Mistress Medhbh has gotten anything new from the bot, I haven't seen anything.
I have not. It's my understanding that it's a subject coming up on an agenda of theirs in the relatively short term. The board is, of course, aware of the January 31st deadline, so I imagine they will be talking about that and a related set of issues as they're looking ahead to the spring.
Hopefully that gave you the answer or something to allay your concerns.
But also, I think that part of that, the reason we're having this discussion in November for something we're planning on doing in February is, one, to give us time to work out the logistics side, but also to give us time to hear concerns or ideas that may improve the process.
Your Majesties, a couple of questions have been asked and answered in the live feed chat, but I would like to ask them here for you so that those who might not be seeing the live feed chat will also get the answers. It had been asked, when is Crown normally supposed to be held and what is the delay for currently? Just so that we can clarify that for everybody.
Yeah, normally our heirs would have been decided at a crown tournament fought in May, right?
I think so, but May would have
End of
better
April,
answer
start
to
of
that
May
question.
usually.
May?
Yeah, or
April.
late April.
Late April, May. It may have been late April, would have been the scheduled date, and then we would have stepped down. Their heirs would have been found in November, which is the one that we won a year ago.
Right.
Yeah. Fun times. And that becomes the rotation. The delay is obviously because we can't have events or gathering groups or fight. So if I can ask a question, because this is something I've been thinking about. I'm going off topic.
You're going off topic.
I'm not going off topic. So my question is, and I'll take answers from anybody who wants to throw one at me here. When we come out of this, especially when we're talking regionals, we may not be on what was a rotating schedule of regions for Crown. What is our responsibility for, has that rotation assumed to advance? Are we stuck on the last region that was due a crown? What is our obligation there?
I don't believe we have one, just because I don't think it's written out in Kingdom law, because this has never been done before. But Maeve may have a better answer for us.
I have the same answer here, Majesty. It is unprecedented in law. Law does not anticipate a rotation of tournaments that might be completely out of regular schedule. It indicates a preferred weekend and a second preferred weekend. And, should there be need for variance to a third preferred weekend, that would be possible. But the law does not describe significantly out of sync sequence of what to do. It does say, though, if the seneschal is holding the crown for the heirs in a abrupt vacating of the throne sort of way, so not for military service kind of reason, that the seneschal must hold the tournament as soon as possible and need not comply with the usual rotation.
Right.
So in the context of very unexpected circumstances, then it doesn't need to hold, but it doesn't say anything about what happens much.
So let me throw a question at his grace here. As we're looking at and talking about regional tournaments, how do we need the entire kingdom to be kind of at the same level of openness for this to work?
So my thinking is that the pods are going to go to where are going to be situated so that all fighters can get coverage. There's a philosophical problem here, right? On the one hand, you want to be as inclusive as possible for everyone that you can have. On the other hand, we have lived through histories of certain groups, the military, for example, not being able to fight in crowns because they were often foreign lands. And so I think that the tack that I would, as a base take, is we're going to try to be as flexible as possible to be open, but when we've done everything that we can, then we're just going to proceed onwards. So I think no, not every part of the kingdom needs to have the same openness in order to have a crown tournament, but that should still be the goal. That is, if we can humanly do it, then we should do it so that everyone can participate. And if we cannot see a way for that to happen, then we have to bite the bullet and thank everyone's understanding for the parts of the kingdoms that can't. This is one of the reasons why I'm hoping that our crown tournament is late enough that border crossings are no longer an issue, but there's a limit to how long you folks want to stay on the throne, right? So
Well, I think
Mistress Medhbh's got it.
I had a follow-up. So looking at EK law in front of me, if the seneschal is holding the crown for heirs, tournament as soon as possible, that crown tournament need not follow the regional rotation, and the victor of that crown tournament and consort are immediately crowned monarchs. They, brand new crown, needs to schedule a special crown tournament so that they have heirs, and the special crown tournament also does not need to follow the regional rotation. And here's the part I'm adding. After the special crown tournament, the rotation will resume as if the special crown tournament had been held in the proper rotation. So there's this little bubble of we might need to kind of jiggle things around to make it work, and then we shall pick up with the regular rotation.
Okay.
So our major roadblock are real life pandemic issues for trying to hold a crown. There is really nothing that we can do to make that process go faster. So just trying to do a timeline here, we cannot pinpoint a specific date where we can say, this is when we can do stuff. There's nothing within our power that are gonna make our local officials work any faster. Even if there is a vaccine in place at some point, who knows on how to make a timeline to make everything work.
And the next BOD meeting in December does have, I actually think it's December 1st, does have the event ban on the docket. So we should hopefully know well before we get to February discussions what additional barriers may be in place there.
So all good feedback, all good questions. We're digging this. All
So
right.
let me say a little bit about the timing for crowns. one of the reasons why we have crowns in late October and late April, early May is for the October crowns, for that person, for those people to be made monarchs in time for them to do something sensible about Penzek, and to have heirs to be at our largest event of the year. When you don't have that as a pressure point, then I think it makes sense to leave those dates a little bit more open in the hopes of being able to include everybody. And so then what the gating factor really becomes is a combination of when we can include everyone against the timeline of when you folks have to decide that you need to step down.
Right. Well, I mean, at this point, I don't have any other plans for this winter.
Yeah.
As long as the kingdom is happy, I'm all right. You okay?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. If the kingdom is willing to basically let us still reign during this thing, it'd be happy to keep all the gears moving and make sure all of our populace is recognized for rewards.
So if that's the case, my advice, as a guy who's been in the kingdom for a while,
Yeah.
And not necessarily the Earl Marshal, is to hold the final parts of Crown Tournament on the late side in order to give everyone a chance to be in it, and then figure out how late it makes sense to do that for.
Yeah, because just sidestepping into mundane life a little bit here. As someone who works in a school, I feel the very real possibility of getting something started and then losing the ability to continue with momentum, and that prospect scares me more than waiting.
A really interesting question came up on the live chat. If the consuls do step down and the crown's go into receivership with the Kingdom Seneschal, would Tindal and Alberic be allowed to fight in the next crown tournament?
Technically, probably yes. But if we want to hold to the spirit of EK law, we shouldn't.
Right. If I was the Seneschal, I would not accept our letter. I'll tell you that one, because the intent there is that you are never your own heirs. And if the crowns are in receivership, then you would effectively be retaking a reign. I can't envision a scenario where we were forced to step down, unable to complete, and in a position to compete again.
As a personal level, I don't think we will ever do that. Just so you know, just to get that out there, it's a hard no, probably from all of our wives and everything like that, to not do that to them.
Also, I think there's actually a bit of case history here. The mid-round crowns that had to step down because of membership lapse were not allowed to fight in their next crown. And I'm pretty sure that stricture came from the society level, not from their kingdom level.
Hold on, was that after the mid-round? Because the one that I'm thinking about that was in the neighborhood of 10 years ago, with the membership lapse, he stepped down and then was able to win the emergency crown tournament to retake.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. I want to say it was his. I don't want to be wrong. I haven't.
Oh yeah. You're right. I was misremembering. I think you're absolutely correct. So
yeah, because he calls it a reign and a half because he only got one reign but had to win 2 tournaments.
Yeah, and he finaled against. Oh yeah, because he finaled against Dog, right?
Yes, he did.
because Nog decided that he was going to fight in crowns after all.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was wrong. Sorry about that.
Sorry, just me.
So should a letter of intent like that arrive if I am holding the crown, I would absolutely run this by Society Seneschal for a variance. My personal opinion would be a hard and fast no, but I would also want to make sure that it wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction. And so the extraordinary circumstance of that would lead me to check up my chain of command on that.
That's fine. So realistically, this is one I don't have an answer for, but it is a question that's going to come up at some point. So let's say we push crown down the road a little bit, but we get crown, we have a crown, we have heirs. How long do they get to be heirs?
So that is where the section of law that says the next crown tournament shall return to regular rotation, as if the special crown tournament had been held in its usual spot. So if the heirs were to have a significantly shortened reign, their crown tournament still happens sort of on schedule, as opposed to them getting a 6-month reign that starts in July or something like that, right? It would revert to our current law schedule.
So I'm just making this up. So would there be an advantage to staying closer to the kind of traditional dates for coronation, so that if their crown tournament is locked back into the rotation, they're hitting a coronation that would, because they're just finding heirs as normal, where their coronation would give them what would feel like the normal start date to a reign?
With all due respect, that is game side about which I don't have a law opinion.
Fair. No, wait. It not being dictated by law is a very valuable answer in this situation.
Your for instance is giving me little gears turning here. So trying to set timelines for heirs and trying to dictate that. My personal feeling about that is that trying to get things back on track to a regular schedule is that they would be heirs until there could be a reasonable timeline turnover according to our kingdom law. So say we do get heirs in spring, right? And we're able to do that. Timelines, who knows? I'm not overly optimistic about that. But I would say that we would continue until we can figure out the step-up time to try to reintegrate back into kingdom law for when crown tournaments and coronations should happen. So in essence, we would extend our reign until we can fit it back into the East Kingdom timeline. Does that make sense? And does that sound reasonable?
I think that some of that is honestly going to have to be knowing where crown tournament lands, but also becomes a conversation with heirs on what their comfort level, what the expectation level is, and what's going to be best for the kingdom. I don't see a crown tournament and coronation happening on the same day.
Right. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want to do that to anybody's being stepping up in that situation. Thoughts, opinions?
More questions?
More questions?
More cabbages?
Hey, I just had Brussels sprouts for the first time the other day, and they're like small little itty bitty cabbages. They aren't bad. You gotta roast them. I don't think you can. If you boil them, they don't taste the same.
Well, cooking preparation definitely changes the flavor, but I encourage everyone to give Brussels sprouts another try because they are better than they used to be. I'm older or they grow tastier Brussels sprouts. I can turn this into a cooking show.
Totally. I've been cooking a lot during this pandemic.
No.
So it's so basically what we've done in our household is we've gotten the dinnerly boxes because we have a hard time trying to set all sorts of different things, trying to get through everything that we're doing now. So I've been doing a lot of majority of the cooking, and one of them involved Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
And it was baked in salt and garlic. It was awesome.
They're also delicious with cream and bacon, roasted with cream and bacon.
I use just butter, onions, and bacon in mine.
Do we have any questions?
I have just asked in chat to see if I can prompt a few more people. But other than that, I think we're doing pretty good.
If
Sorry.
Crown could not be held until June, would you reign through the fall?
His Grace Brennan has asked if Alberic has suggested that if Crown could not be held until June, you would reign through fall.
To try to basically integrate it back into the normal schedule into what East Kingdom law is, because I would not want to give someone a 3-week reign or a shortened reign at all, so that they can actually do the things that they wanted to do during a normal set of reign to hold to the spirit of East Kingdom law.
Yeah, I think that was the intent. But I think a lot of what we're saying today, I think there's some flexibility in that. The same way that we were able to find time in August to transition. And, I suspect we're looking at a summer of much smaller events. And so I think that there's I don't think it has to be, I'm thinking that first weekend in October where it normally falls. I don't think it has to be a wait all the way till October, but I'd love to give whoever our heirs are enough time that they got a staff together that they were comfortable with, that they were able to find a site that realistically, that coronation site is going to be their decision. So that coronation site would still get to be their decision. And if that took them till October, or if they found a spot that was September or August, but to put them closer to a reasonable short time, and then they would get heirs in November, and it would put us back into that rotation. So in my mind, the day after Penzic is the first day of fall, and I know that's not true. So reign until fall feels very long. I think that there's a very cushy window there that could accommodate an effective transition. So let me ask a weird question to Viz. When we're talking about regional qualifiers, are we talking one per region? Are we basing this based on population density? How many of these do we put out there?
So in my mind, the way that I think of it is, first you're going to say we're going to have a crown tournament. You get the number of people who send in letters of intent. We then look at that list and we put X number of bear pits across the kingdom in such a way as to accommodate all the fighters as best we can. So it's not necessarily that it's one per region. It could be the case that some regions get 2 because they have half the fighters, for example. But I think that rather than think of them as regionals, I think you should think of them as participant-based, so that we're going to put the pods so that we can get all the fighters to fight.
I like that.
Basically, any way the math works out, I think is something that to get to the correct formats of.
All right.
Is there a cap that you're going to consider putting on your reign in terms of duration, pandemic permitting or not, as the case may be?
All right. So having just committed in theory to almost another year in theory, if we get to November of next year, and we're looking at the second anniversary of, I'm going to go really dark and not answer this question. If we get to the second anniversary of Alberic and I winning Crown Tournament, and we as a kingdom have been unable to hold a Crown Tournament for what would have been 1, 2, 3, 4. We will have missed 4 Crown Tournaments, and we do not see a path forward. I think we, at that point, should be having a very different discussion about the method in which we're going to continue to function as a kingdom. I don't necessarily want to say that I throw the crown at Maeve and run away at that point, but if we go 24 months without being able to logistically function and meet that, and we don't see a clear path forward, I think that a year from now we're having a very, very different discussion. Right, I think at that point we're having curious to rewrite kingdom law. I think we're having a very real discussion with the bod about.
I think that this more discussion with the bod about that would be a better course of action instead of going ahead and trying to rewrite kingdom law to basically shoehorn in a pandemic.
That's fair.
So, truthfully, the pandemic has thrown everything into turmoil, and especially our hobby. Trying to write that into kingdom law, I think, would be not the really good course of action to do so, because we're not going to know what another pandemic's going to look like 10 years down the line. So basically, I would put a little asterisk next to ours and Margarita's name, and if we're still in the pandemic, asterisk saying pandemic year.
So there are some additional follow-up questions regarding the potential bear pit format.
Sure.
The first being, would you require a 2-week gap between the regional qualifiers or the separate individual qualifiers and the actual crown tournament?
Heck if I know.
Seriously, we don't know. We don't really know what tomorrow's going to look like, right? So, trying to force a 2-week or trying to impose a 2-week between qualifiers, I don't think is reasonable. Just because we don't know what local laws and everything's going to look like then. If we're able to have events, then that's a whole different story. Because if we're able to have events, then I would believe there's no reason to have a 2 weeks between.
It's tough. I can see the rationale between having the break. I think a lot of this is going to come down to scheduling. At the beginning, we talked about the possibility of all of the bear pits happening on the same day versus having them happen staggered, and not even having an answer to that question. I think some of it, like, we can get into really like the game side, the head space of a fight, and a fighter who has a fight and waits 4 weeks versus a fighter who has a fight and waits 2 weeks, and how much of that we need to take into consideration versus the safety of the participants. And I will say that every single decision that we've been made, that's been made, and again, a huge thank you to both Viz and Maeve on this one. Every single decision that's been made this entire time has always been a safety first decision. And so I can confidently say moving forward, every decision made will be a safety first decision. And so if it's a safer decision to make, then that's the direction we go.
I do favor a little bit about having sports analogies and basically trying to fit things into that kind of thing. So say boxers, right? Boxing, there's prize fights and everything like that. And there's definitely long times in between for training and everything like that in between fights. So if it's going to become a necessity to be able to do that, then that's how it's going to work. Biz, correct me if I'm wrong here, but right, you know, for that kind of headspace, as boxers, you know.
I think people's psyches vary dramatically between individuals. I'm not ready to put a timeline on when we have the second part of Crown Tournament, presuming that of the pods is the first part of Crown Tournament, because I think when the time comes, we're going to do the best that seems sensible at the time, right? and we just don't know what that is yet.
So I'm going to throw back to Maeve for a second. I know that the East is the first kingdom that I've lived in that has an international border, but we certainly aren't the only kingdom with an international border. Do we have ideas of how those borders are being dealt with by other kingdoms?
Somewhat of an idea. On tier, last I checked, which was a few weeks ago, on tier had said that they will not be having Crown Tournament until the border is open. And North Shield hadn't yet started to think about what their Crown Tournament situation might look like. So I don't know how long on tier intends to hold that line, but that is their current position and has been their current position since earlier in the summer.
And I certainly know that on our end, we're looking at each kingdom trying to find their own way forward. And as much as we talk and look for counsel with other sitting royals, we are very aware, and this is kind of the point of eventually getting to a broader kingdom conversation, that our solution is going to have to be uniquely East.
And another follow-up question on the bear pits, and forgive me if this has already been answered, but I want to make sure that we cover it, is that we're potentially looking less at it being regional and more specific to the pool of fighters, so that a region, if it's got 40 fighters in the pool, they might have 2 qualifiers, or you might have a qualifier in Western Tirmara versus Eastern Tirmara to ensure that there are enough participants.
Yeah. Right, and so because this isn't like a preset March Madness where I can draw a tree out for you right now, without knowing how many people are going to be participating, it becomes impossible to tell you how many people advance from each pool, right? Like, it's going to be dependent on how many fighters you have, how many you put in each pool, how you spread those pools out, and then how many advance. So that would happen once. That would absolutely be disseminated information, but we would need to be much deeper in the process to have answers of how many people will be where. Just as we normally would for a Crown Tournament. I know that I always anxiously wait to see a published list to give me an idea of how many people would be in each pool that I'm fighting to get up into a tournament of 16, and I don't know those until I know participant numbers and names. You want to plug your dinner plan again?
No.
Turn this into a sponsored movie,
Yeah.
sponsored YouTube show.
Yeah, right.
No, you imagine you got it right.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think, just because I'm not being fed any questions right now, I think that the message really is that right now the goal is to have a conversation so that when we get to a decision, there's an understanding both of why and hopefully a happiness with where we land. Because the last thing that we want is to disappear into a black box and come back out with what we think is best. But rather to have an open discussion that we then take into a black box and come back and tell you what we think is best.
Really, we as the monarchs don't want to make this kind of decision unilaterally, because the populace really needs to be involved. There's really no way that we would actually come up with a suggestion and then plot it on ideas and go, here, East Kingdom, this is what it is, without having your input. So I don't think that would go over very well, and I don't think we could be really good monarchs.
Because that's what we would have done. Like, no, like in normal times, we would have just designed a crown tournament that would have tested the combatant and consort couples in a way that we saw fit, and then we would have had, victors at the end that would have been crowned heirs. But everything is so different now. I think that it would be a bit more egotistical than even I am willing to be, to kind of just like put my foot down and say, as is tradition, here's how it's going to be. I really do think that it has to be like an open, where is East Kingdom culture moving and how do we get it back as we move forward?
So there is a follow-up question. What are your thoughts regarding the possibility that some of our US states will be ready significantly before others, or that some might reclose during the planned time period?
Perhaps Viz is going to jump in and interrupt me, but I think that this kind of plays to the planning farther down the road. I suspect that we were kind of closest to all being open in the warmer, if not warmest months of the summer. I think that looking at a time a little bit further down the road gives us the better possibility for everybody being open. But I think at some point, logistically, we get as many participants as we can, and accept that it may not be the perfect solution to allow everyone full participation. I mean, His Grace used the example of deployed military or other very real mundane restrictions preventing people in the past from participating. But I would argue that even with the rotation, there are times where we look at the location of a crown tournament and think, it's too far for me to travel, either time commitment wise or financially. And so we choose not to participate that time. And I hate that it's a decision that wouldn't be within the competitors, the consorts' control to be able to choose. But I think we may need to accept that catching most may be better than waiting for all.
Yeah, I think that delaying things for as long as seems sensible to us at the time makes some sense, particularly because we don't know what the future is going to be like, right? That is, we might have a real question where we could say, well, maybe we're going to do pods in late April, but if vaccine looks like it's going to be out there, you might have a full crown tournament if you were willing to wait till July, right? And so we really just need to see how life proceeds a little bit more before making decisions, which is why I think the town halls in February are going to be where things become a bit more concrete about what our options really are going to be.
Yeah, I'm being fed a question here that is one that I don't want to answer. I just want to say it out loud and say that this is one that I need to talk about when we get to the town halls. And the question becomes, could we do coronation on the same day if crown tournament was limited to royal peers only? And I'm going to focus that down to, I'm not sure that a royal peers only crown fits within what feels like Eastern tradition. I could be wrong, and the populace of the East could all look at me and say, we would be fine if you limited your crown to people who have already sat the throne only. I don't want to predict which way the kingdom's going to go on that one. I want the kingdom to answer that for me.
Audrey, do you have any more questions? Is there anything else coming?
That was actually the last one that I had seen come through. And I think now is probably a good time to sort of quick summarize everything that we've discussed in the last hour or so.
All right.
I say we go to our guests first and see if they have anything to say in closing.
I'm good.
This is good, babe.
I'll just say that if there are announcements from the board pertaining to Crown Tournament and various iterations of or the in-person events, or if I hear from my fellow Kingdom Seneschals about variances that they are granted and so on, we'll disseminate far and wide so that people will have that as soon as we can.
So I'm going to say that a year ago when we won,
You're not expecting this.
but we certainly had plans. You look at the kingdom and you say, what is a positive impact that we can have moving forward? What are some things that we can nurture and we can grow? And unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing right now is the number one priority is that when we go away, there's still an East Kingdom. And as much of that remaining intact as possible. And along the way, are we going to have to compromise some of the ways we do things? We already have. Are we going to have to sacrifice some traditions? Traditions, yes, people know. Because the first goal has to be that the East Kingdom survives our reign. And that
Making sure that this hobby and lifestyle of ours that some kind of people kind of consider it, make sure it kind of moves on. And so that others can enjoy the same things that we enjoy today.
Yeah, I'm looking around at people that have been in the SCA for a long time. You have, I have, I know His Grace has, Audrey, Maeve. I've been here a long time because it's where my friends, my family, and my heart is. And when we leave the throne, I still need that. I still need that to be a part of my life, and that has to be the priority of this reign, is keeping that alive for when it's not ours anymore.
Your Majesties, do you have any closing words?
Thank you for everyone who showed up today and asked us questions. I hope we can alleviate some of your concerns about our reign in general, and to be able to someday hold a crown tournament and the spirit of our East Kingdom laws and traditions to make sure that we keep everything moving forward.
I still have concerns about our reign. But I would say that every decision is always going to be made with the safety of the populace foremost in our mind. If you're watching this discussion and you've got a question in your head, talk to a friend, reach out to us. The goal is for the collective mind of the East to begin moving so that we get to February, we have fruitful discussions, we look at the next year ahead of us with a plan and start to be able to make commitments and dates and timelines. So come back in February. Come back in February with more ideas, with more solutions, with a better way to do things.
And always tune in to our virtual courts to make sure you get the most up-to-date information that you get on everything that we have to say.
Thank you, Your Majesties, for your continued work for the kingdom and for your focus on the people of the East. To the people of the East, thank you for joining us today for this live discussion about the future of the kingdom and the future of crown tournaments. Long live the Kingdom of the East. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, all of you, for joining us at home, but also Your Grace, your Mistress Medhbh, Audrey, as always. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.